What about solar? Or not solar, wind turbines and things like. Are we doing some stuff with wind?
We tested some wind in the eastern part of Tennessee. Those turbines have since come down.
Really?
The key to wind for the Tennessee Valley is lots of high voltage transmission from the Midwest, right, or the West, where there is good wind power.
We just don't have enough wind.
Yeah, you would have to import it, and then you're back to exactly this issue, right? How do you build that kind of infrastructure, right? It blows me away all the time when I think about the scope and scale of the infrastructure we build to support all of this, right? This way of life, right? And so much of it is behind the scenes, or it's somewhere else where you don't see it. But these are massive projects, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are projects that cost billions, tens of billions of dollars, and take decades to execute and build. And the kind of will you need to get those things done, TVA is good at, right? And we've done that for 90 years, but it can certainly be a limit to how big you can think. But to your point about wind, the wind doesn't blow well enough here to be a valuable resource for the valley in the valley. Might there be opportunities to import some? That would depend on more big infrastructure projects that could better move power around the country, right? Not just within the Tennessee Valley.
Yeah. I was just in my mind, I was thinking about, I was just driving my son to Idaho, and we went through Wyoming. And at one part of Wyoming, there was some huge wind turbines, right, as we call them.
Yeah.
And, you start counting them, like, man, there was a lot, hundreds,
Yeah.
For miles and miles.
Yeah.
And, a few things, like one, like, great project, great way to create electricity. But then also just the economic, like when you think about people who want to live kind of, hey, I want to live anywhere in the country, and like, okay, well, what's your job going to be? And you can work remote, but do you have internet access? And there's going to be some limitations. But I was just thinking about how awesome for those people in rural Wyoming, or where it could be anywhere where the wind is strong, that they could have a career and probably worked for that company, built all that infrastructure, right? Maintain it.
Yep.
And we need that. You need farmers, you need electricity. And, like we've tried collectively to figure out where our resources are stronger in different parts of the country, right?
Yep.
How do you leverage those? Oh, like the Tennessee River.
Yep, exactly.
It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Singing River Trail. I just wanted to circle back to that real quick.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think the neat thing, and I know John and
John Kovach, for those people who don't know.
And they've asked me to serve on the board of Singing River Trail as they kind of spin it off from launch, which I'm just privileged to do, because Singing River Trail is on its level, right? It mirrors so much of what TVA was, TVA's DNA, I guess I would say, right? TVA, like I said, is a necessarily regional entity. It crosses state lines. It's not about Madison County or Limestone County. It's about this 7-state region. Going to manage this resource, optimize it for everybody up and down the river. The things that happen in Knoxville affect what happens in Muscle Shoals, right? And this idea that John in the land use committee conceived, right? This regional trail system, and it was smaller at the beginning, but at this point it spans the whole state, right? Really speaks to me about the potential of literally crossing those lines that might otherwise divide people who can be partners and who will realize that the good things happening in Northwest Alabama, in Cortland or Leeton, right, are part of the tide that's lifting all the boats along the Singing River Trail, right? Just like we think about the Tennessee River in North Alabama. It's all literally and physically connected, right? And I don't know, it's a good metaphor for me about us, right? That we're all connected, that the things we're doing for each other, right, when they matter. So anyway, part of what I like about working at TVA, part of why I've been there 16 years, and part of why at this point and for the last 15, it's been more than just a job, is that connection with, right, some purpose that's about more than optimizing return for some shareholder, some faceless shareholder who could be in some other part of the country or some other part of the world. No, what we're doing literally impacts people on the ground in this part of the country in meaningful ways, and hopefully in really positive ways.
Let me ask you this. So I felt the same way just working in the intelligence community, where you realize that even if you just have you're a database administrator, you're a project manager for something, you have some title. Well, then the greater purpose was kind of the country that you're serving, and you're doing your little part. We have a lot of fanfare around those in the military and veterans and all that, but then there's a whole bunch of people who work in government that have that same level of pride. Everything that they're doing is for the public good, or doing something in our case, national security. Did you see people that chased greener pastures that you worked with, and they left? And let's just pick on, I don't know, like a candy company. I was just kind of thinking of like, what would it be like to work for like Twizzlers? And my goal is to sell Twizzlers, and hopefully people are eating a lot more candy. And like, it's not to like poke fun at them, but I'm just trying to think of something where would I find enjoyment in that? I want to sell candy to the public.
Yeah.
And I hope that there's not like this big campaign by dentists that say you shouldn't eat sugar, but like, would I find as much value in selling candy as I would working for the TVA, working for the Intel community, where you feel like, man, I can really see impact to consumers and to the public good. But did you see people that like kind of left thinking they were going to go do whatever, and then they came back because, man, I didn't realize how much I really appreciated my portion of making citizens have a more comfortable life and have more access to critical resources?
Not for that reason. Yeah, I'm struggling to think of someone I've seen that kind of boomerang with. I have seen and know TVA employees who've left and come back to the company. Typically, I guess I would describe it more generally as it's just I took for granted what I had at TVA. Yeah. Right. That idea, maybe it's the first place I worked, and I didn't know that every place wasn't like this, right? Because TVA actually has a whole bunch of really dedicated, really smart people trying to do the right thing every day, right? Sure. Because the objectives and incentives are aligned to do that. Well, every place isn't like that. You can work some places, and I've worked other places where, and I've represented clients who ran other businesses, where that was not the ethos, right? And so you can certainly leave a place like TVA where there's this maybe alignment and to this higher level mission and purpose, and end up somewhere where that's a lot harder to find in here, right? Because I think a lot of what you're describing, a lot of it does depend on the person. I guarantee you there's someone who works for Twizzler today who has, who's connected what they do to some higher purpose of bringing joy to people's lives or whatever it is. Yeah. And they're just like me about TVA, right? They're doing a podcast telling somebody how, no, Twizzler's different. It's amazing, right? And here's why.
You couldn't enjoy a movie unless you had your popcorn and your Twizzler, right? Oh, that's a good point.
That's right. But I know there are other places where that's a lot harder to manufacture. It's a lot harder to get there, right? Yeah. And the kinds of opportunities you get to work in public service, right? And again, I think this is the case whether you're a contractor, staff augmentation or task, or an employee or an executive. There are places you can go work where the bottom line objective is the public good, whether you're providing a utility service, whether you're providing security or national defense, right? That whether you're an elected official, right? Whether you've given up your time to go sit on the county commission or get elected and go to Montgomery and try to do the public's work for your constituents, yeah, there's something there, and I think it's back to this issue of connection and how we help and support each other, right? You can draw a direct line from the thing you're doing, maybe not filling out a form on any given day, but big picture, you can draw a direct line from the thing you're doing to some positive pro-social impact that's going to help people and improve people's lives. And I think that's what, for me, that's the difference from. And look, most of my family and friends work for for-profit companies, right? And they've got aspirational goals, and they've got mission statements, and they've got big ideas. But what I love about TVA, like I said, is it's not negotiable. We can't decide tomorrow to be a different kind of company. We are what we are because federal law says this is what you do. And I imagine folks working in government in other roles, it's similar. Yeah.
Well, and the other thought, as you were talking, I was thinking about, you and I are probably very similar, right? You look at a resume and there's some growth, right? You've had some growth, even if 16 years at TVA, you've done different things.
Yep.
You've tried different things. You've probably taken some risks, if you will, with your career. Kind of always chasing to do something. Now, this is kind of a generalized statement, but I've worked with, when you have a nuclear plant, you sometimes have that guy or gal they may have been there for year upon year upon year in the same job, but they like it. And, and you rely on them. You start to realize, okay, not everybody is gung-ho for what's next for me. They just want to keep doing a really good job at what they do. Yeah. And you need those people, right? I'm sure there's that one guy. Let's just pick on a guy that's got the 75 keys on his belt. The kind of the maintenance person that just knows every square inch of the plant. Yep. And will retire there after 40 something years, but it's what they do. Yeah. Right. And you can't. I used to probably, when I was younger, I'd probably been critical of somebody like that. Yep. Then you realize later when you're like a manager and it's on you, the P&L, or just the ultimate, you need somebody like that who you can count on that every single day they're going to show up. Yeah. And they have a key to everything. And you're going to lock yourself out of this thing. You're going to screw up, and that person is going to bail you out time and time again.
Well, that is the one thing, and I'm same trajectory, right? When I was first a manager years ago, I thought everyone needed to be like me, right? Or certainly everyone aspired to be like me, right? You want to give all that discretionary effort. You want to put everything into work so you can achieve and then go do something different, right? That's why I went to law school, because I thought a legal career would allow me to move from one issue to the next, one case to the next, meet new people, find new challenges, learn something new, finish that case, put it away, go on and learn more, right? The great thing about TVA and a company, and maybe it's any big company that's big enough, right, that there's room for those people at the company. And there's room and need for the folks who are like, you know what, this job I got is the job I wanted. It's the best job I've ever had. I don't want another job. I want to get really, really good at this and do it every day. And by the way, I'm going to put my 40 in, but that's it, right?
Yeah.
You're not getting the discretionary effort and all the other stuff from me. I'm going to do an excellent job for 40 hours because in my life, these other things are, need more attention, right? The interesting thing I've noticed is those aren't just two different kinds of people, right? Sometimes those are the same person at different points in their career, depending on what the rest of life is demanding from you. Yeah. Which, again, is something I really appreciate about TVA. And it's probably a function of being a large enough company that there's room within the company and roles within the company and teams that are large enough that as you navigate your personal life through a career and things happen, you get divorced, you have an elderly parent you need to take care of, you get sick, right? You can mash the accelerator, you can dial it back. As your just priorities change over time, you can find a place and a way to work that works for the company because you're part of this team. I've been really impressed in 16 years at TVA, personally, for myself, and then watching others navigate that, right? Kind of work-life balance, people call it, right? it's been a great company to accommodate that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've learned a lot working at TVA.
Yeah. I, as you were talking, I was thinking about, like, so as a manager, I took a lot of pride in, can we create a program and grow a program where somebody could have a career within the program? And there was a technical side, there was an analytical side, great pride in someone that wasn't like an analyst, because that's what they were. They came in, but our contract was such that we could allow this analyst who had bigger aspirations, rather than having to leave the program, leave the company to continue or put their toe in the water of like that technical side. Because we weren't, a lot of contracts wouldn't allow that. Well, you can't take this position. You don't have all these prerequisites, whatever. We had a customer that was very accommodating, said, hey, we want to have this person for as long as they want to stay here, 10, 15, 20 years. Let's allow them to do some certifications, do some training, and go into the technical route. And we'll end up having them a lot longer. Plus, we'll have the advantage of they've also done the analytical side. And vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, you sometimes you could work for a really, really small company, but then whatever contract you were on, if that position goes away, whatever, like no one's helping you because you're a subcontractor. No one's helping you to find another job when you're gone.
Yeah.
You're dispensable that way, expendable. So it was great when you could have someone interview with you. They would ask all the same kind of like questions where they were nervous about whether or not this was a good move for them. Like, look, I can guarantee you could have a whole career on this program and you can do all these various different things. That was a good feeling.
Yeah.
And I would imagine TVA is big enough like that, right? Where someone can come in, hey, you can just do this one job or you can have a career here.
Yeah.
Right. And you're a great example of that.
Yeah.
Of the many different things you've done in 16 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been, it's been a privilege and it's been fun and it's not anything I imagined I would have ever done. Right.
Yeah.
Like I said, I went to law school for completely different reasons, took the job at TVA for completely different reasons. But then, I don't know, sometimes timing is everything, right? And so the point you're at in your life, the people you're around, right? Through circumstance and things just click into place and you're like, okay, this makes sense, right? This works. And I think all the time about TVA employees, the folks on my team, but more broadly, right? The idea is to find that sweet spot where the work you're doing for TVA is meaningful to TVA and valuable to TVA and in some way meaningful to you, which is always a unique value proposition, right? What's meaningful to me and what I need from work, right, is going to be different, right, than someone else on my team. But figuring out what that. I don't like balance. I don't like the work-life balance thing because it's all life, right? It's all life, right? But finding that place with your employer where that exchange of value is, you're not just getting tasks from me and I'm not just getting a paycheck. You're getting something meaningful from me.
Yeah.
And I'm getting the same back, whatever that means. Boy, if you can find that, then, and I think a lot of TVA employees have, which is why really good retention at TVA, which is why it's hard for me to think of more than a handful of folks that I know who left and came back because they don't leave.
So let me ask you this. I'm assuming you do some recruiting at the colleges and universities. Yep. What does it look like? What are you saying to, let's say I'm a senior and I'm looking for a job. And I go to a career fair type thing and your booth is there. They're looking at their options and then they stumble upon TVA. You're there. I mean, let's talk about the types of jobs that are in the most need for where you're going to recruit right from college, and then ultimately what your value proposition is to them.
Yeah, I think we'll hire every engineer we can get, right, at this point, right? Because we're in, let me give one little preface. We are in a growth phase right now, right? So for the last 15 years or so, last few years we have been growing, but there was a period of about a decade where things were just flat when it came to electric demand. The region was growing, right? This part of the country was growing economically, right? GDP was about 2% a year, right? But electric demand was not growing. So our sales were effectively flat. We were retiring some old assets, bringing some new things on, but we weren't growing. The last couple of years, post-pandemic, we've seen unexpected demand in electric growth. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the forecast is that that is going to continue, like out to 2050 as you electrify transportation and other parts of the economy. There's a lot of these big infrastructure projects on the electric side that have got to be built and deployed over the coming decades. Just in the next 3 years, TVA will spend $15 billion in capital, right? Invest $15 billion in capital assets. There's a lot of construction projects, right? That's a lot of building natural gas plants, solar farms, and transmission lines. And beyond that, maybe new nuclear plants and pumped hydro storage and other things in the 2030s. But right now, we are in a growth and construction phase. So when I say we'll hire engineers, we need good engineers, right? And that's not just electrical engineers, civil, mechanical, the whole gamut. We need, you mentioned colleges and universities, and definitely community colleges and trade schools, right? So we need machinists, we need welders, we need boilermakers, right? We need pipe fitters, we need folks to do that work, and those are great careers. Now, 99% of that work at TVA is done in partnership with the 17, I think, unions who represent our workers. So that workforce, we see high demand and maybe short supply over the next coming years, right? So we are looking for folks who can be highly skilled, hands-on professionals to help build and operate the grid that's going to power the rest of the 21st century, right? And then of course we always need just smart finance, legal, right? The kind of corporate folks, right? The analysts and folks who help us model and plan this system of the future that we're building. So why TVA? I mean, it's a lot of it is what we talked about, right? You can go work, first of all, water, air, food, electricity. I mean, today, that's it, right? Like I said before, electricity makes almost everything we care about in the 21st century possible, or it's a necessary input, right? I mean, even the stuff that runs on diesel and gasoline these days needs an internet connection to be able, to know where to go or how to operate or download the latest firmware update for whatever computer system. I mean, the cars are just computers on wheels at this point, right? So, and all of that, you think, well, that's just a phone. That's just all wireless. I don't need electricity. Well, of course, just because it comes the last 100 feet to your phone or your car over the air belies the fact that it's backed up by huge infrastructure projects, huge data centers, power distribution, fiber networks that run across the country and around the globe, right? Power stations, all of that is what it takes to make your phone and your car do those things, even if it is an internal combustion engine, right? Or to get the delivery to your door or whatever it is. There's just really nothing that happens. And certainly all the cool stuff, all the AI, all the social media, all the medical advances and breakthrough and genomics and everything else, well, none of that works.
I would love to, just real quick, so this interview, right? Ultimately, it's going to yield like a 10 gig, 12 gig file, just our discussion. And then I'll push that up to YouTube. And, YouTube hasn't come to me and said, hey, we need to limit.
Right.
Well, the one thing great about YouTube as a creator, other platforms will do this where they'll limit the size. But every time I keep sending out gigs and gigs and gigs, somewhere in some data center, they have to get another rack-mounted server and pop it in to handle my storage requirements. Or, it's not like they're checking with me either on forecast I wonder how many gigs or terabytes this guy's going to throw at us this year. That's just one of millions. And that's a massive infrastructure decision that they're having to make.
Yep.
And I know most of those things are in Northern Virginia. There's just nothing but data centers.
Yeah, well, we've got some big ones here in the valley.
We've
got them really all over the country as they build out an infrastructure that in some ways looks very similar to ours, right? These big central station generators and then distribution systems that get the power where it needs to go. It's the same way with the data. on some level, right? These big hyperscale data centers and then trunk lines of fiber and things that run other places to get the data where it needs to go. But you know, the point is water, food, air, yes. The things that are making the 21st century different from the 18th century, though, it's at this point, it's all electric, right?
Yeah.
And someone from the chemical industry would say, no, it's all about new chemistry. But
Yeah.
it's hard not to see how important and impactful affordable, reliable, 24/7 electricity is to the modern world that we all want, and all of the advances that are just on the horizon that will provide benefits to us and our children and grandchildren. So when you talk about essential services, I think it is one of the most essential, and it is one, again, that's growing. It's one where there's lots of opportunity. So if you look at the world and think, well, I could go work for a chemical company or an oil and gas company or one of these companies that uses a lot of electricity, right? Meta or Google or something. Or I could work for the electric company, right? I could work for a company that is building the infrastructure that will literally power the economy for the next 100 years. And if you're going to do that, there is no better place to go than TVA. There are investor-owned utilities all over the country where you've got that shareholder dynamic. You got to take care of your ratepayers and try to keep their rates low, but you've also got to balance that against shareholder expectations about their return on their investment, right?
Yeah.
There's one place you can go where this model works. And it may not resonate for everybody, but that environmental stuff we do on the back of, the revenue we generate from the electric system, that stuff matters, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not a biologist. I'm not an archaeologist out protecting cultural resources, right? I'm not one of those other disciplines at TVA who take care of the environment in the Tennessee Valley. But we have that at TVA, right? I didn't mention the biologists and the archaeologists before, right? I mean, we need those folks too.
Yeah.
The hydrologists and folks who help us manage the river, right? So, but even though I don't do that, I take a lot of pride in, as a TVA employee, in the fact that I'm part of a company that has that responsibility and takes it really seriously and does it really well and creates this value for the people that we also happen to sell electricity to, right? You go work for another electric utility. I mean, it could be very commercial. It could be very transactional. Look, I'm just here to make some money. You're just here to, to make some money. Let's do a deal and run that business. I think the mission, if that matters, right? We talked about the different kind of employees and what they need from work for them to have a meaningful career. Some folks don't need that.
Yeah.
But for the people who want that kind of purpose-driven, meaningful career where they're getting more than a paycheck out of the bargain, right? There's not a better place.
Is it an easy sell on these college kids?
Yeah, I think so. The compensation is good at TVA, meaning it's this utility federal agency kind of hybrid, right? So we benchmark to other utilities. It's not an easy sell because a lot of kids coming out of school, just like I did, want, right, to know, well, how much can you pay me and how much student debt do I have and what's that math?
Right.
But for the students who, I'd say this, for the students from the Valley, from the people who live here, the people who understand what TVA is, it's an easy sell, right? And so that's part of the opportunity, is helping people understand this conversation we just had, right?
Yeah.
That you may not even know this is here, number one. Even if you do, you may think going to work at Browns Ferry at the nuclear plant out there is just like going to work at any other nuclear plant in the country. There are other nuclear plants in the country. This happens to be the second largest one. It is unique in a lot of ways, but you might think that's just a job and I could go do that job in Arizona or somewhere else. But it's not, because you are part of this bigger thing that, again, even though you're not the biologist or the archaeologist or the economic developer, at the end of the day, you can go home knowing that you're part of that, right? You're part of this thing that's delivering life-changing impact for your neighbors.
Yeah.
Right? And as you drive from here to wherever you're going, to a Titans game in Nashville or something, you can see the impacts of what this big company you work for is doing. So I think that is absolutely the easy sell. Yeah.
It's interesting to think of, like, compare the 1920s. There's probably a lot of excitement around this dam that they're building, right? And what it would do. And then here we are 90 to 100 years later, and there's still excitement around critical infrastructure, right? And these massive projects. And, you know,
Well, there's excitement.
we're human beings.
Yep.
We're separated by 100 years, but there's still excitement.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good stuff.
There's excitement, and then, like I said, there's trade-offs.
Sure.
But it is a very exciting time to be kind of in this industry, right? For some of the reasons I described earlier, the electrification of large pieces of the economy, the drive to generate electricity in new and different ways that are lower and lower carbon and more sustainable, right? So there's this growth plan, there's this sustainability opportunity, there's, again, and things that impact everything across the board.
Yeah.
I just can't think of a more, and again, I just stumbled into it, backed into it, basically, had no idea, and now I'm like preaching like I was some kind of
evangelist,
but it's just it's hard for me to think of a more dynamic, relevant, impactful place to go to work every day than TVA. Again, I'm sure if I worked at other companies, I could find that alignment, right? And some of that passion. It's just easy at TVA.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Before we hit record, you were asking me a little bit how I got started, and I'm trying to and I was telling you about how I was doing football games and I was doing play-by-play and stuff, and I was also telling you how unreliable the internet was, how unreliable, you know, we weren't using cloud computing, so I don't think people fully understand the reason that you can do a Facebook Live or a YouTube Live or all this kind of stuff, right? And it always works, is because behind the scenes, not one, not two, but there's usually 3 locations that cloud provider is using in they're hot, active swap, right? Redundancy, where these very powerful data centers are working together to ensure that you never have a blip in your service. And so here we are, why is podcasting so commoditized now? Because it's easy, all because behind it, there's a massive electrical grid, there's massive server farms, and, you know, the cost of compute, I guess, is fairly cheap, and they just roll in rack after rack after rack of computer equipment so that you and I can sit here and have an uninterrupted discussion.
Yeah.
If this was live, literally, honestly, 10 years ago, I would have apologized 8 times by now that it dropped. Right. And I could have never have told you why. I don't know if it was just my internet going out, because that was the same thing too. If you were streaming, they would tell you, if you were a professional streamer, you would have 5 different ways of connecting out to the internet, and then that would kind of choose your best path. But you would have Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile, whatever, Verizon, all simultaneous.
Yeah.
Just so that you wouldn't have any blips.
Wow.
And that kind of effort now is just a commodity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's already being done for you, where you're getting the best service all the time.
Yep.
You
And
know?
that kind of reliability and then resiliency, right? That
Yeah.
redundancy that gives you the no blips, right? Is
6 nines.
I mean, that's been a given with electricity in the valley for decades at this point, right?
Yeah.
And that's also a neat thing about the industry, right? And maybe maybe the data is a really good metaphor as far as how the data moves and is managed, right, in real time. But it's supply and demand,
Sure.
down to the second.
Yeah.
The ability to keep the lights on and the electricity flowing at exactly 60 hertz, right, is a matter of balancing demand and supply every hour, every minute, every second of every day. So as load comes on, as people get home from work and turn things on at home, and the load ramps up, that load's got to be matched with generation resources and transmission that get the power where it needs to be second by second. all over the Tennessee Valley, right?
Yeah.
And of course, this is one small part of the country. Like I said, infrastructure blows me away. When I travel, especially, I go to a big city like New York or something, I think, how does this all actually work? How are there 9 million people here? And the lights are all on, and the water's all flowing, and the subways are running, and the trash is getting taken away. And it
Yeah.
works. And same thing in the Tennessee Valley, right? Even just, I think about the electric system in the river a lot, but then you got folks like Huntsville Utilities taking care of gas and water and electric, right, to your home. And the way it all works is a bunch of people, those pipe fitters and welders and machinists and those engineers and those hydrologists and the lawyers and the accountants and everybody else, those people all just show up every day and do their jobs. They show up every day and do their jobs, and the modern world works, and I'm blown away by it every day.
The one thing that really blew me away in that presentation you gave was this revolutionary approach to like what you do with the excess overnight.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? I'm trying to remember whether it was
Yeah.
just how you manage that.
Yeah, so the first thing so the power demand, like we said, supply and demand has to be matched hour by hour, minute by minute throughout every day of the year. And so as the power demand increases, we turn assets on, right? We fire up a gas plant that maybe was idle before, or we let some more water flow through a dam where it wasn't before, right? We literally turn assets on and generate more power. And then as that demand goes off in the evening, let's say when everybody goes to bed and a lot of businesses have shut down, we turn those things off. Now, there are certain assets we've got on the system, like our nuclear plants. They do not like to be turned up or down, right? It's on or off, and you want it on and you want it running all the time.
Right.
So we call those base load, right? Those things that just run 24/7, 365, unless we're refueling at a nuclear plant. And then we call the other assets, we just kind of layer in on top of that to meet the peaks. And I'm using my hands a lot to kind of demonstrate
Please do.
a graph, right? Well, there are times when you want to keep your base load generation running, but maybe the demand has dipped below that level, right? So now I've got excess power. What would I do with that? Really, the only thing you can do if you want to keep supply and demand balanced is to decrease generation at that plant. Or you could also store it, right? And that's the thing about electricity. We've not had a good way to store it for a long time, except the one I'll tell you about in just a second. Lithium-ion batteries have come a long way, right? And we've got a project underway right now to test about a 20-megawatt storage system at a site in Tennessee, because that issue of balancing supply and demand in real time means you have to cycle these plants up and down, right? So how do you store that energy if you've got more supply than demand? Put it in a battery. Like I said, that technology is coming a long way. But for decades, we've had really good storage. And TVA currently has a facility that we call Raccoon Mountain. It's at Raccoon Mountain in southeast Tennessee near Chattanooga. And it's a pumped hydro storage facility. So it operates like a hydro dam in the sense that water flows through a turbine to generate electricity. But that same turbine is also a motor that can be used to pump water. So this particular generating plant is inside a mountain near Chattanooga, on the Tennessee River. And above the plant, at the top of the mountain, is a large reservoir. So, and then there's a giant penstocker shaft that runs from the Tennessee River to that reservoir on the top of the mountain. The power station sits in the middle in between, and we've got excess electricity. There could be two reasons. One, this scenario where I said, demand just got really low, and we've got excess supply. And power is typically pretty cheap at that point. Middle of the night, if we've got excess supply, sometimes you can sell that supply to other people, but at the middle of the night, everybody's in that situation. No one is going to pay for our power. Power is plentiful and cheap at night. So we use that power to run those motors and pump water from the Tennessee River up to that reservoir. We'll run those motors, pump that reservoir, fill it up when powerful is plentiful and cheap, for example, at night. And then the next day, let's say it's a really hot summer day, and demand climbs and climbs and climbs as everyone goes to work and everyone's building is at 65 degrees or whatever it is when it's just way too cold in the middle of the summer indoors. The load grows and grows and grows and grows, and we let that water run back down through that same penstock, that same shaft, except now that motor turns into a generator as the water runs the other direction and puts up to 1,600 megawatts of power back on the grid when electricity is scarce and expensive.
Yeah.
Right. So you pump it up when you've got excess and it's cheap, and then you let it run back down and generate electricity when it's scarce and expensive. It is a great asset for balancing our system, for helping do that kind of minute by minute balance between supply and demand. And we are currently evaluating building a second one of those. I think Raccoon Mountain was commissioned in the 70s. We haven't built one since. TVA, as well as a lot of other utilities around the country, are looking and evaluating new pump storage facilities. We're looking at a site in Jackson County early, doing evaluations, doing geological surveys. But they're amazing assets for the system. And like a Wilson Dam or a Browns Ferry, these are multi-billion-dollar, decade-long projects. But once you've built it, you've got a valuable asset that you could run for 50 or 100 years, right? So those are big infrastructure projects again. And a lot of the ones we built 100 years ago, we all take for granted at this point. But we're at a point where we have an opportunity and a need to invest in more. And I mentioned before, that pump storage project is probably in the 2030s, right? New nuclear plants for TVA are probably in the 2030s. The big infrastructure projects today are natural gas plants, solar farms, and transmission lines to connect it all. Right?
Yeah.
That's the big infrastructure today.
Oh man, it's good stuff, man. I love learning about these things.
Yeah.
And having my eyes open. Go ahead.
Raccoon Mountain has a great visitor center. If you're headed to, staffed by TVA retirees, it's a really neat visitor center, cool overlook. There's a park there with biking trails and other stuff as well.
Is it near that Lookout Mountain? Is it where the zip line stuff is in Chattanooga?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where that is, but I was just up at Raccoon Mountain with my daughter the other day. It's a neat spot. It's a neat part of the valley if you're headed that way anyway.
Sure.
Yeah. TVA is unique.
Yeah.
And I think it's uniquely valuable to this part of the country. And there are a lot of unique things in North Alabama, right? The river, Redstone Arsenal, the shoals. I mean, it's the biodiversity here that you mentioned earlier. Yeah. Absolutely, right? This is... and like those TVA employees who maybe left for greener pastures and then realized, oh man, I had a pretty good thing at TVA. Can I come back now? Right. Boy, I hope we don't take it for granted, right? Heck, it's the day before Thanksgiving, right? I mean, if there's an opportunity to just take a step back, and this is not the TVA pitch, but just more generally, right? What is it that makes this part of the country great? We talk about, there's growth here. So there's job opportunities and the cost of living but what makes those things possible, right? Well, it's the place we live. It's the geography. It's the features of the landscape and the people who live here and show up every day and do their job that make it all work, right? So I guess that's the only thing I would finish with is just, I'm grateful that I got a chance to work at TVA. And be part of something that I think is good and does public good and has real impact. And being in North Alabama in a really unique part of the state where we've got just a really rich legacy, right? And a really strong foundation and so much opportunity in front of us, right? I mean, that's something to really be grateful for and not take for granted.
Yeah.
So
now, in the time you spent in Mobile and in Birmingham, did you have a little bit of animosity towards North Alabama, kind of growing up, a little chip on your shoulder?
I did not. I didn't even think about North Alabama growing up, except the one time I went to Lake Guntersville with my dad to go fishing, and that I recall this one particular trip, and I got to Guntersville and thought it looked as big as the ocean. It was a cool, overcast day and windy, and of course, I didn't even know that it's not just a lake, it's part of this system and this
Yeah.
river and TVA and all that behind it. I didn't really think about North Alabama or TVA growing up. I do think that we certainly have to be the envy of some other parts of the state and other parts of the country. I mean, we've got a really good thing going
Yeah.
in North Alabama. And yeah, like I said, I don't take it for granted, and I hope other folks don't too, because there's a lot of really good people working really hard on things like the Singing River Trail or like TVA's next big project, right? That'll be around for 50 or 100 years. That are part of these communities as well, and just trying to make it better and sustain what we have.
You know, as my final thought. So tying together the episode I just released was the first centered on Montana. He actually was a vigilante because there was no law in the Western, in the U.S. It was gold rush, and there was just territories. States weren't even weren't incorporated, whatever, and it was kind of just a free for all. But somehow they had to bring order, right, to all this. And so my comment to him is he was telling me about his great grandfather, who was he was a lawyer. And a lot of rights, property rights and mineral rights and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, they're also trying to divide these lines between Idaho and Montana and all this kind of stuff. And I just think it's a miracle, right? That as hard as it is at times to do things when people are involved in the bureaucracy of stuff, like somehow they got through it.
Yeah.
And we have the U.S. as we have it. But then just in that 2-minute video, it's old footage, but just the foresight that people had to build a dam. And then to have this, the War Commission, and how fast air travel. There's a plane flying around in the 1920s. Like they had only had that technology for not that long, and boom, we go right to it. And the interstate system, which I think was just genius, right? But same. That was Eisenhower, but FDR, like just the thought that the visionaries had, and here you are with it, something that we're still enjoying 100 years later in the dam. And 50 years later in Raccoon Mountain, like just these unbelievable advances in technology and thought that most people just they just take for granted. They don't know.
Yeah. And we've still got, I say all the time, TVA was built to build big things and do big things. And we've still got the opportunity, not just TVA, but together in North Alabama, right? And in the region as a whole, to do really big things. Now, it takes a coalition, it takes will, it takes kind of persistence, because these things take years and decades to pull off. But boy, if you can keep your eye on the prize, like I said, you can.
Yeah.
There is someone in the grave right now who went to their grave feeling really proud about the work they did on Wilson Dam and knowing that it was going to survive them and create value for people and prosperity and just everything it does for for generations. That's, if I can be part of that, right? That's what I want to do.
Well, Jared, thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thanks.
I'm going to push this out next week, so this should be fairly recent.
Yeah.
But, again, I really appreciated your presentation, and I'm learning more and more as a previously ignorant Southerner, if you will, and I'm proud to be here, proud to live in this area, and I'm trying to, as quickly as I can, learn about things that are unique to the South. And one final question. Does anybody ever have issue, of all the members of the TVA, do they ever have issue with it being the Tennessee Valley? And like, why does it Tennessee have to be in the name? Can we change it to something else that's a little bit less,
Yeah, well, I think the way they name rivers is, where does it start? And it actually starts right there east of Knoxville, where the French Broad and Holston come together. So it is called the Tennessee River, even though, it starts there and flows through Alabama. I was actually worried about that. I thought, well, certainly people in Alabama, will resent maybe or have that reaction to the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And then I was amazed when I came down here how common that language is. People talk about this part of Alabama and this part of the country as the Tennessee Valley right here in Alabama. I think Sure. Could we call this part the Alabama Valley Authority? Well, we'll call it the South Region for now. But I think there's pride in it. I think people understand, like I said earlier, or feel at least, this river running from Bridgeport to the Shoals and looping down through Huntsville and Decatur, right, and all the places in between. I mean, those vistas over in Jackson County, for example, and right, just all along the river, they make this part of Alabama special and different. So I don't. My sense is that people are proud to be part of the Tennessee Valley because it's what makes this part of Alabama amazing.
You know, I think I've talked about this on other episodes, and like the whole concept of our town comes out of a figurative thing where, so literally, it's nice to be from a town. That's part of why I named it that. I grew up in a town. I enjoyed that versus other places I've lived where it's kind of like, wait a minute, what are we in this city or that, you know? And sometimes the lines kind of blend together. It's nice when you have a kind of a clean, this is our high school and it's our town versus your town.
Right.
That's kind of the idea. But figuratively, we're so competitive with other people. It could be HOAs, it could be high schools, it could be North and South Alabama, it could be the Northeast, the Southeast of the country. And I think the Tennessee Valley just represents another, like, look, you want to be so proud of where you're from.
Yeah.
And we have this amazing river. And it's like, okay, Tennessee Valley, cool. I can associate to that because it distinguishes me from Florida or something else where, you know, you're kind of in competition. Or rather than just North and South Alabama, you want something even more particular.
Yeah.
Whether it's counties and so it's just, to me, it's always like we're always looking to identify with something that then you can compare to something else and then, of course, claim dominance. We're better than you, right? Because we got the Wilson Dam.
Yeah, and then once we're confident that we're better, well, then we'll work with you too. We'll partner with you, right? And that's what I love. So just circling back around then, what John's doing with John Kavach is doing with the Singing River Trail, right? Is well, yeah. Here's this amazing opportunity we got in North Alabama to do this trail system that parallels the river, right, from east to west. But now that's turned into this Sweet Trails Alabama idea, right? That, hey, yeah, we've got the best one up here, and we would love to partner with the rest of the state to help replicate this, and so that you've got other trail networks in other parts of Alabama, and at some point you've got an entire state, right, of interconnected trails. But here's a best practice, right? Or here's a great example of how we're doing it in North Alabama. Same thing I would say on the electric side too. I would feel bad if I didn't mention that we've got competitors to the south, certainly, right? But we've got friends and colleagues to the south at Alabama Power and Power South who are working with us daily to make sure that Alabama is well served, right?
Yeah.
So we have weekly, if not daily, conversations with the folks at those power companies who are also providing an essential service, and we're all doing our part in cooperation with each other to make sure Alabama is well served. So, we'll do it really well up here in North Alabama.
Sure.
And then we'll look for partners that make the whole state.
That's awesome.
Do our part to make the whole state better. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jared.
Yeah,
man, again, pleasure having you.
No, this is fun. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
All the best, and look forward to talking with you in the future and just getting updates.
Yeah,
we'll go from there.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks,
man.
Troy.
See ya.